Because banks are federally insured, most of them will not touch marijuana businesses. So this is kind of a cash business. You'll notice that a lot of these properties are offered seller financing.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com. Hello and welcome to episode 171. You're about to hear a discussion from the RPOA's annual conference where we did an expert Q&A session on legalized marijuana and investment property. And we talked about the legalization of marijuana here in Michigan and what it means to landlords and real estate investors. A lot of our discussion applies to legalized marijuana throughout the country, so you're going to want to listen to this episode because as rental property owners and landlords, there's a lot we need to know about the legalization of marijuana. I'd like to introduce my guest today, Justin Wheeler. Justin is a real estate attorney with the law firm Bolhouse, Hofste, and McLean. Justin practices in the area of business and real estate, and he has several clients in the marijuana space. He also does a lot of work with the RPOA and its members. Now, we had originally intended this to be a panel discussion, but for the first time in doing these panels, I had multiple people turn me down. Justin talked to multiple people, so it's very hard to get people to talk about investing in marijuana and record it on a podcast. But I think we still have plenty of great information for you. And I think we owe Justin a real applause of gratitude for actually being brave enough to be here this morning.
Thank you.
All right, Justin, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Can you just fill us in on the recent developments here in Michigan? I mean, we just voted to legalize marijuana. And what does this mean for our state?
Okay, so most everybody knows, I assume, that in November of last year, a ballot initiative was proposed and passed, which legalized recreational marijuana in the state of Michigan. And that statute went into effect December 6th of last year. So it is now legal, air quote legal, to smoke marijuana or use marijuana in the state of Michigan. And so that's caused a lot of concerns. Obviously, there are multiple states that have passed similar legislation, but as everybody knows, marijuana is still illegal under federal law. So there are big conflicts of law issues, and which is probably why I might be the only person on this panel, and nobody wants to take it on and discuss it. But it has created issues for real estate investors, for banks, for title companies, for rental property owners. And so the problem, too, is that it's so new. There's just not a lot of guidance out there. There's not a lot of court cases. There's not a lot of rules. So we're all just kind of, flying by the seat of our pants, for lack of a better phrase, at the moment.
I think the first question that people have is, what does this mean to landlords and rental property owners?
Okay, so I think that's a good place to start. The statute that was passed in Michigan that went into effect December 6th actually has explicit language regarding landlord-tenant relationships and essentially provides guidance on what a landlord can prohibit its tenants from doing and what it can't. So I don't have the statute in front of me, but essentially there is a laundry list of things that landlords cannot prohibit their tenants from doing. For example, you cannot prohibit your tenant from possessing marijuana on your rental property up to the qualified legal limits. You cannot possess them from using marijuana on your property by means other than smoking. You can still prohibit them from smoking marijuana on your property, but if they use topicals, creams, any of the gummies, candies, anything, if that's how they ingest it, you cannot stop them or prohibit them in your lease at least from possessing marijuana and using it in those means. Essentially, there are only two things that you can stop them from doing. One is smoking marijuana, and the other is growing marijuana. You do not have to allow your tenants to grow marijuana in your rental property. So the RPOA Services Committee a month or two ago put together an updated marijuana addendum, which is available on the RPOA's website. I suggest you check it out if you don't have anything regarding marijuana in your lease. It uses some general language because the way that the statute reads, it essentially says you can't stop them from doing any laundry list of things except that you can stop them from smoking and growing. And, I think of it as if it were my lease and my rental property, I wouldn't want to tell my tenants, hey, tenants, look at these 12 things you can do with marijuana on my property. So we kind of phrase it in a way to say, it's a little convoluted, but it essentially says that to the extent landlords are permitted to prohibit marijuana-related activities, I prohibit those to the fullest extent under law. That way, if the tenant wants to know what they can do, they've got to do some research on their own. And now you can be clearer if you want, however you want to put something in your lease, but you do need something in your lease. So if you don't have anything in your lease that says they can't grow or smoke marijuana, and you have, let's say, a year-long lease, that doesn't necessarily mean you can just throw them out. You can't just go in there and kick them out. You want to have some type of addendum. If you're on a month-to-month lease, you're going to want to change that. If you've got a year-long lease or more that's coming due, you're going to want to put something in there before you renew it. Something, whether you use the RPOA's language or your own language, that says that to the extent you can prohibit marijuana-related activity that you want to do so. Now, that doesn't mean you have to. I've even heard a couple people say that they were considering charging premiums to allow people to grow or smoke. If you have, maybe an older rental property and, maybe it needs a lot of work or whatever the situation is, maybe you could even say, hey, we're marijuana friendly. And maybe you can turn that $800 lease into a $1,500 lease. Who knows? But if you want to prohibit it, you need to have something in the lease.
Let's talk about this premium, because I want to talk about both the pros and cons here to landlords. And it sounds like there are a few cons, but the premium that you can charge. So if you do want to be marijuana friendly, how much more could you get in rent, do you think?
I have no idea. I think we're all just getting started. I've just heard of people considering doing this, and I would just say that the market is what the market is. If you, let's just say, had a property in downtown Grand Rapids that would normally rent for $850, throw it up on wherever you throw it up and say marijuana friendly. We allow marijuana smoking and we allow personal marijuana grow operations on our property, and list it for $1,500 a month. I can't guarantee that somebody's going to want to come in and lease that for that price, but I have seen myself homes just for sale on Realtor.com that have said things like, hey, former grower lived here, set up in the basement for a grow house, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, I think that's an opportunity if you're willing to take that risk.
Sure. You say there's a list of like 12 things that tenants are allowed to do in regards to marijuana. What are some of those things, and what do you consider to be some of the most adverse of those items on the list to landlords?
Essentially, you can't prevent them from doing anything other than smoking and anything other than growing. And so they can have a certain amount, whatever it is that they're allowed to possess by law. They can have that on the property. They can, ingest it in any various way. It's just that you're very limited. The statute, it's kind of odd that the statute even talks about that specifically, the landlord-tenant relationship, and that there are so many things that landlords are prohibited from prohibiting. But I would think that the most detrimental thing to the property as far as damage or concern would be smoking, and you are allowed to prohibit that, which is good.
Can you clarify the growing? If I have someone growing to sell, I can prohibit, but can I prohibit them from growing with their own card where they're growing for themselves?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so growing in any way, it doesn't matter even if they have a medical marijuana card and they're growing for personal consumption only, you can still prohibit that activity, but you still want something in your lease.
And when you say card, you mean they have like a medical marijuana card, so they're growing it for medical marijuana personal use.
Right. So before recreational marijuana was legalized, we had passed the Medical Marijuana Act where people could have a registration card, and you could purchase marijuana from certain approved marijuana facilities, or you could grow to a certain extent for yourself and for your other patients. That's still operating now, because even though the the new statute is passed, and even though you can legally ingest marijuana in the state of Michigan, that doesn't mean you can go somewhere and get it, right? I mean, there's still not a retail shop on the corner or anywhere downtown where you can go buy marijuana yet, and to be honest, there probably won't be for another year and a half or more. The last I recall, the state has until December of this year to even start accepting applications, I believe, for recreational marijuana businesses, and the state can move rather slowly at times. The medical side has ran very slowly at times, and so it could be years before we even actually see retail shops open.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. If someone does have a medical marijuana card and they're growing just a small amount in their unit for their personal use, what is the harm in that?
Well, there probably isn't, as long as you're okay. I mean, obviously there's an odor that's going to emit from marijuana. And let's say you're, in a duplex and that smell can, go through the vents or whatever. It could go into the other unit. You might have the other tenant calling you, and you could have a provision in your lease, most people do, that says that you won't reasonably interfere with the use and enjoyment of their property. And so then the question could be asked, are you doing that by letting someone grow marijuana, which smells, and then people in the other units can smell it? So there are problems or issues. Now, ultimately, I mean, is your property going to be damaged by letting someone maybe who has chronic seizures and needs marijuana and wants to grow a couple of plants in their basement for their own personal consumption? Probably not, but that's still a risk you take. Now, if you go online, you might see, horror stories or people saying, if you do that, you're perpetrating, a federal crime. You're letting people knowingly smoke and grow and use marijuana on your property. The federal government can come in and kick down the door, and seize your property. And while that is technically a possibility, the likelihood of something like that happening is astronomical.
In favor of it not happening.
In favor of it not happening.
I'm surprised to hear you say it being so new. There's so many other states that have had this in recreational marijuana. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you're going to do some research in the other states with regards to rentals and so on. The other item I have is I've seen single-wide trailers blow up in production of marijuana products. Mm-hmm. After, that's another thing you'd want to make sure you cover on your lease. I just thought that was amazing. But other states have these rules too. I'm sure we can form our rental agreements about them.
Are you familiar with the other states and what the rules are?
No, I'm not.
Are you?
No, I haven't looked at, if you're asking if I've looked at like a lease in Colorado or a lease in Washington to see what they do or how they handle this, no. I mean, ultimately, it's up to you. What they put in their lease is not going to be anything really different than what we put on the RPOA for the addendum. It's you can really handle the situation however you want, as long as you are not, contradicting the state law. So as long as you're not trying to prohibit possession of marijuana in general in your lease, you're not violating Michigan law, so it's fine. If you want to have people grow in your basement and you're okay with it, maybe you want to charge them a premium for it, that's fine. You can do that. But if you don't want them to grow and you don't want them to smoke, you need to have something in your lease.
Now, isn't it a case where the language in the lease is standard boilerplate? I mean, you created a pretty generalized language to cover a lot of situations. But we're still not certain exactly what the Michigan law is, are we?
The recreational statute is out. The language that we use for the marijuana addendum and for the RPOA leases is out. We have that. It's more the rules and regulations for businesses that hasn't been released yet.
This may come off as being a little naive, so I apologize in advance. I have some single-family homes that I rent, and some of my tenants in the past have they enjoy growing plants, so flowers and things like that. I want to just clarify on what you said earlier about what's the harm in growing just a small plant, and then you started talking about it emanating into, like a duplex, emanating into the other area. Am I to understand that growing it, these marijuana plants do have an aroma just by growing it, or are you referencing the smoke? Because I do know that when you go into a smoke-filled room, you can tell a difference between tobacco smoke and marijuana smoke.
Sure.
So is that what you were referencing, or just growing it emits an aroma?
Just growing it emits an aroma.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, if you were to walk into a grow house, I mean, you're not going to walk in there if you had closed your eyes and say, oh, I didn't know if there's marijuana in here. I mean, I think you're going to smell that. Now, I mean, to the extent how bad it is, how much you're growing, again, it's really up to you. It's up to your other tenants. It's kind of a facts and circumstances type scenario. I mean, if you had what I would do if it were me and I had a duplex and I had someone who just let's say they had a medical card and, the example I use is they have seizures or something like that. And they want to grow a small amount. And, if you're okay with that, what I would do is contact my other client and say, hey, the person next to you has a medical condition. They need to use medical, cannabis. They're going to grow a small amount in their basement. We just want to make sure you're okay with that. It could emit an odor. Maybe you'll smell it. Maybe you won't. We don't know how strong it's going to be. If it becomes an issue, let me know. But and kind of just try to, just like anything, stay out in front of it. The last thing you want is just a call from the tenant on the other side, just accusing them of having a party and using drugs and all that stuff. Just think it's better if you get out in front of it. Then they might not even care the first time they smell it.
If you are thinking of leaving your W-2 job and becoming a full-time real estate investor, one of the greatest costs you must consider is healthcare for you and your family. When I made this transition 5 years ago, I found the whole healthcare insurance process to be confusing and frustrating. That's why I'm glad I met Chad Creasy at RCB and Associates. Chad is a professional healthcare insurance agent who helps real estate investors and small business owners understand and choose their best healthcare options. And best of all, his services are covered by the insurance company and won't cost you a dime. If you are expecting a change in your healthcare insurance coverage for any reason, or losing employer coverage or transitioning into Medicare, then you owe it to yourself to contact Chad Creasy at rcbassociatesllc.com.
I agree with that. I tend to leave. I try to do a good job screening, and I let my tenants live there on their own. And I use every 3 months, I go over there, change the filters in the furnace and and check the batteries, make sure things are working. I use that 3-month window as my excuse to go in and try and kind of do a check and balance and make sure everything's the way it's supposed to be. So
What's your feeling about allowing your residents to grow marijuana?
I'm still on the fence, but right now I'm leaning towards just banning it altogether. And earlier we were talking about an addendum on the website. I'm definitely going to download that and review it. And I think I'm going to start enforcing just a plain no smoking policy. If they want to eat it, ingest it, in that sense, I don't have a problem with that, because to me, that's just another food product. Whether they're buying lobsters or steaks or marijuana, I could care less. But it's when it starts impacting my business, my overhead of now, smoke. I've got to get that smoke out of the house.
Right.
Sorry, that's where I draw the line.
Yeah.
So let me make sure I understand. If I signed a lease with somebody back in October and then the law changed in November, I have to wait till next October before I can do any kind of an addendum? Or because the law changed, I have some right to address it or not? So
you as a landlord mean you just brought a tenant in like a month ago?
Well, just like a month before the law changed. It was November, right? It changed.
Yeah.
So if I signed one in October, they could grow or do whatever they wanted because I didn't have the addendum back then because it wasn't legal.
Do you have anything on smoking? Is there anything on drugs, narcotics?
Just on, smoking cigarettes and stuff, but it doesn't.
So there are other ways. I mean, not to go too far down the lease, issue, but if you're concerned about that, so let's say your exact situation, and you find out that they're growing, and you say, well, shoot, now they're not going to sign an addendum, because they want to grow, and I'm kind of locked in. I would take a look at your lease. There's a lot of other things in standard leases that you may be able to lean on if you just want them out. You want to say, you're not growing here, or I want you out. And they say, sorry, there's nothing in the lease that says I can't grow. Sometimes leases have standard paragraphs that say that tenants have to comply with all state, local, and federal laws. And so you could technically go in there and say, you are not complying with federal law by growing a Schedule I narcotic, and you could try to get them out that way. So there are other things to do, but like in your situation, I'd recommend you contact an attorney if you want to get somebody evicted for that reason.
Okay.
Thanks.
Are you having a problem with the tenant who was?
I'm not. I just have signed some leases, toward the end of last year that I didn't have anything in there, and now I'm kind of wondering what could be going on in the house or whatever. But
It would be possible for him, though, to try to get his tenants to sign an addendum.
if they would voluntarily do it, that
Sure.
would
I mean,
be
you can
great.
send a letter with the addendum and just say, hey, with the new law passing, blah, 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 here's the new addendum to our lease. Please review it, sign it, and return it. And if they do, great.
And if they don't?
And if they don't, then you discuss your options. Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
Hi, rather than deal with all the addendums regarding the marijuana use, what about just putting everyone on a month-to-month? That way you can terminate for any cause, any reason.
Yeah, you can certainly do that. So, I mean, anybody who's on a month-to-month right now who finds out that there's growing or there's smoking going on their property, you don't need any explicit language from the statute to get them out. You give a 30-day notice. You don't have to give a reason. So I teach the evictions class for the RPOA as well, so I recognize some of you. I know you sat in on it before. And if you're on a month-to-month lease, you don't have to give a reason. You just give a 30-day notice, tell the judge you want your property back, and you're going to win unless the tenant essentially shows up and claims that your eviction is retaliatory. So, I mean, that still doesn't mean if I'm you, I don't want something in there. I mean, for example, I'd still want something in there stating that they can't do that. And then if you catch them growing or you catch them smoking marijuana on the property, that you're going to assess them a $200 fine or charge or whatever. And then you can still evict them, ask for a money judgment, maybe get some more money out of them for a lease violation.
A few moments ago, you gave the example that in a duplex, talking with the other neighbor about, well, this person has a medical condition, and that's why we're allowing or disallowing HEPA rules.
Well,
How
I would talk to your tenant first.
Okay.
To make sure they're okay. So I know where you're going with that before you even got to the end of the
Yeah.
question.
Where's he going with that?
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, don't just randomly disclose medical information.
One question is inside or out? I didn't hear you define where they're smoking.
On the property, but you can define that
Okay.
in your lease. So if you say, I don't want you smoking inside, I'm allowed to prohibit you from smoking anywhere on my property. I don't want you smoking inside, but if you're okay with them smoking in the backyard, that's okay. I would just make sure you put something in the lease that states that.
Can you
Right.
prohibit them from smoking in the backyard?
Yeah, anywhere on the property. So,
Okay.
Yep.
That's important. The other thing is, I had a person use meth in a house, and they were producing it in the backyard, and it cost me thousands to clean it up. But it also was almost impossible to prove that they were using it. How in either or situation, how would you be able to prove that they're doing meth or marijuana or anything like that? How do you get to that place where you can do something about it?
So again, that's something we talk a lot about in the eviction class, where I often have people come and say, just in the terms of cigarettes, they say they're smoking cigarettes on the property. I want them evicted. They can't do that. And so I say, okay, well, do we have any photos? Do we have pictures? Did you go on an inspection? Are there ashtrays laying around the tables? Do we have neighbors that would sign an affidavit? Because what happens if we spend the money serving them, we go to court, we file a complaint, we get in front of the judge, we say, Judge, they're smoking, and they go, no, I'm not. And right, where are we? So you have to be prepared, like you said, to back that up to the best that you can. So if you have neighbors that have complained about maybe the smell or the odor of marijuana, I would try to get statements from them. I'd try to get maybe an affidavit from them or something. When you go in on routine inspections, if you do that, if there's paraphernalia laying around, things like that, take pictures. You just have to try to substantiate your claim as best you can.
Neighbors are afraid of
Well, I don't blame them. Yeah. But yeah, it's a difficult situation.
Your meth tenant, is he gone?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. That's a nasty problem to deal with.
Yeah.
Hi.
Morning. I have a couple hopefully quick questions.
Sure.
So my first question was this morning I was reading on MLive where the former Detroit Lions player Calvin Johnson, he and his wife just received preliminary approval for a provisioning center license.
Mhm.
So with him being awarded that, realistically, how long do you think it's going to take until he's got like an actual brick and mortar shop where you can go?
Well, that is for medical marijuana.
Okay.
So those licenses are really just being issued right now. To put that kind of the timeline in perspective, the first application I submitted for a client was in April of last year.
Okay.
I heard back from the state in October for the first time saying we need more information. And this is a multi-phase, there's phase 1, phase 2, approvals at the local level. It's really very intensive process.
Okay.
So even if they've been approved, I haven't seen the article. I know Calvin Johnson was involved in that, but I don't know if that's a phase 1 approval, phase 2 approval, if he has local township approval. But even when that store goes up, you're still going to need a medical marijuana card to buy it.
Okay. It says, I think it was just posted this morning, it says the Medical Marijuana Licensing Board had just issued it. I guess he and one of the other players went up last year, but somebody had tickets, so now it's him and his wife.
Okay.
My other question was kind of related to that. I'm a realtor, and I'm representing some friends who are looking at starting a CBD oil company. And eventually they would like to have a dispensary. So right now they're looking to shop around for property that might be able to house their distribution as well as eventually be a site for the dispensary. But I just have questions like legalities, like what kind of commercial property should I be looking for, as well as if you can comment, if you have knowledge of how does that tie into banks and deposits, being that the money is still federally illegal. I'm just trying to navigate all of this for them so that they're informed and they know what challenges to look for.
Sure. So that is going to be one of the topics. I think it's probably our next topic. So it's probably a good time to just get rolling on that, right? So, let's start with sort of finding properties. So let's say you have somebody who either wants to run a marijuana business, or maybe a landlord who wants to buy a commercial property and lease to a marijuana business in order to sort of indirectly take advantage of the industry. Well, the problem is, especially for the retail, you talked about a retail like a storefront, is those properties are few and far between. There's not very many of them. Obviously, the city of Grand Rapids had approved them and then not approved them, and it's sort of in limbo. But other cities in the area, like Kalamazoo, for example, City of Kalamazoo, City of Portage, they've approved these things. And you can go on their websites, and they actually have maps showing you where the marijuana-approved properties are. And because of the restrictions the municipality and the states have put on where these things can be and how far away they have to be from each other, there might only be 15 lots in an entire city like Kalamazoo where a marijuana retail center could even operate. And that doesn't mean those are available. It could say, hey, look, lot whatever parcel number could be a marijuana facility, and then you show up and it's a medical building. So there can be big problems trying to find those, and they're going for significant premiums. There are realtor companies that are just popping up that are specializing in these properties. So if you just search for marijuana properties in Michigan, you might be able to find some of these cannabis broker companies. They don't have a lot of properties available, but they have some. And I'll tell you one story just to give everybody an idea of how the markup on these are going, and I'll just kind of change some of the things from the story. So I had a client of a client who owned a little tire shop. And it was just on the corner of a pretty busy intersection. And he estimated that the property was probably worth $150,000 to $200,000. And it was on the east side of the state. All of a sudden, he gets a call from what turned out to be a wholesaler who was going around as soon as the ordinance passed and the map comes out, where are these properties? They're getting them all under contract immediately. And so he gets a call and they say, hey, you're in the marijuana zone. We want to buy your property. We'll give you $700,000 for it. So he, believe it or not, sold the tire shop to these guys. Now, part of the due diligence was that because they were a wholesaler, he had to, this was in a prolonged due diligence period until their buyer was approved to get and operate the marijuana. So this is going on for months and months and months. I say that, probably 3 months. And he gets another call from somebody going, hey, just saw you're in a marijuana-approved property. We'll give you $950,000 for it. So he balks at the first deal, signs the new deal, gets sued by the first group. Anyways, it turned out to be a very long story, but I used that just for the numbers so you can see that this guy wasn't doing anything. He just happened to be lucky enough that he owned a small little business in this one corner where a marijuana retail shop could actually be located, and he's just getting calls and offers for 3-5 times what his property is worth. It is. It essentially is like winning the lottery.
Repeat the question, please.
She asked about Grand Rapids and about those maps. And Grand Rapids had approved marijuana facilities, and then they put a moratorium on the discussions. I know they had picked discussions up recently. I don't know where exactly Grand Rapids is in the process, but you could go to the city of Kalamazoo, city of Portage, a lot of the places that have approved them, and a lot of them now have separate marijuana pages, on the government's website. And you can see what their local application process is. You can see the maps to kind of where industrial properties. So you want to put a grow facility out. It's a lot easier to find those, but a lot of people want those retail shops, and they're tough to find. They're expensive. So
the question is, what about the banks and the deposits?
Right. So banking is tough because banks are federally insured. Most of them, I won't say all, most of them will not touch marijuana businesses. So this is kind of a cash business. I have heard in sort of almost like a black market that some small community banks and credit unions are working with marijuana businesses, but not to the extent that I can say XYZ Bank is marijuana friendly. Go ahead and give them a call if you want to do something. I do not have any banks that I'm aware of, and the banking industry, legislation has been proposed repeatedly for years, trying to give the banks an exemption so that they can deal with these businesses, and it fails in Congress, believe it or not, over and over and over again. So that's probably not going to change until marijuana is descheduled at the federal level. I think it's going to happen eventually, just my personal opinion. It might take 2 more years or 10 more years, but I think it's going to happen. Eventually, marijuana will be descheduled. And when it does, a lot of those things will change, and they'll open up, and they'll be easier to do. But right now, banking is tough. And so financing these properties is tough. You're not going to get a bank loan for $1 million to buy a piece of property that's going to be used to run a marijuana business. You're not going to. So if you go to if you find some of those realtors I mentioned, and you search for them, you'll notice that a lot of these properties are offered seller financing because they know that if you can't pay cash for it, there's no option. So a few of the ones that the last time I looked at the website a week or so ago, a lot of them, the sellers are offering seller financing. So as long as you can come up with a down payment, you can work the terms of the seller. You don't have to go through the bank so that you can actually purchase these properties. Because it's a problem for the sellers too, because their buyers list is very limited.
Well, one of the other things that in doing research for this conversation and trying to get people to come on this panel, one of the people I talked to was in the insurance business. And there are very few insurance products available for this type of business. In fact, I think there's just a handful that will actually insure buildings where marijuana can be distributed or grown.
So is there, like with a CBD oil, it can legally contain up to 0.3% of THC. So because it could have that minute trace of THC, does that essentially knock out all CBD products that could have that up to that legal limit?
As far as what?
As far as money and tying it back to banks who will finance, or just like, so let's say they have a CBD company, they're selling the CBD oil online. So legally you can have up to 0.3% of THC. So can they still, they're accepting credit cards online, can they still have that money deposited into a bank and it still be clean, or is it still going to be tainted by that 0.3% of THC?
I would talk to the bank. I would ask the bank. I would be very forthcoming with the bank about that, about what's going on. because the last thing you want is the bank to find out, seize all their assets, seize their accounts. I mean, I would be very forthcoming with them.
Okay.
To the extent it's legal under federal law, and again, we're kind of talking about CBD. I'm not quite sure what you're, the point 3 that you're discussing, if all of that is still, under the same umbrella as,
Okay.
marijuana being federally prohibited. But if it is, the banks they're not going to touch it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
It really seems like in its early stages right now, the marijuana business is kind of like the wild, wild west. I mean, it's a cash business. There's a lot of cowboys out there, trying to make a lot of money. But there's also a lot of opportunity because the bigger players, the larger corporations who kind of control the pharmaceutical industry and all that, they're not really able to get into this area yet, are they, because of the illegal nature? Can you just talk about some of the opportunities that are out there for entrepreneurs and investors to get into this before the larger, bigger players do?
Yeah, well, I think number one is if you own existing property where you happen to hit the jackpot, like we talked about before, and you're in a green zone, leasing to a marijuana business. You can probably lease those properties at a significant premium. There is something in the statute that does state that it has to be somewhat reasonable rent. So if you're charging, just for the sake of making my numbers simple, if you're charging $50 a square foot for a commercial space, and then a marijuana retailer comes in and you're going to charge them $400 a square foot, would they pay it? Probably. But there is something in the statute that states that if you're making too much money, you're really part of that business. And even though that's not true, that's how the state's going to view it. So you need to sort of toe the line. I wish there was a number I could say, how high of a percentage you could charge or not charge, but I can't because it's so new. It's such a new industry. As far as getting involved in, again, trying to distinguish between as a real estate investor and purchasing part of a marijuana business, I think is you have to go, like we said, either on those realtor websites who are specializing in selling cannabis properties. If you want to try and buy a piece of property and lease it back to somebody, you could do that, and you're making significant premiums. But this doesn't come without risk. We talked a little bit about the federal laws as well, and it's something that everybody should be aware of before anybody runs out and says, "Hey, I've got $500,000. I'm going to go buy a retail shop in Kalamazoo and lease it out to somebody for $20,000 a month." That because it's illegal under federal law, I mean, do you face possible repercussions? Yes. I mean, does it mean it's going to happen? I don't think so, but that's just my opinion. Right now, the federal government cannot come in and come after you. There is an amendment passed. It's been passed for a while. It passes yearly. That essentially defunds federal prosecution of marijuana-related offenses in states that have passed legislation. So the DEA, if you buy a commercial building and you start leasing it out to a marijuana business, the DEA is not going to come, knock down the door, seize all their assets, and then seize your property and try to prosecute you for going in and operating a criminal enterprise or assisting a criminal enterprise. That's not going to happen. That can't happen right now. That doesn't mean things couldn't change. Depending on who's in Congress, that act could be repealed or it could not be taken up again next year. The Attorney General could change, Congress could change. And, I know a lot of people are probably aware Jeff Sessions is very anti-marijuana. He wanted to go into states and do this, and now he's not there anymore. But so it is a concern. Do I think anything is ever going to happen if you lease space out to a marijuana business? No. If they actually wanted to come into Michigan, if the federal government did, they're going to be looking for big grow operations. They're going to be looking, for people that are distributing, I think, on a big level. I don't think they're going to be looking to come take down the person who owns the real estate that leased it. If that's the case, we've got to go after the people that sold them their lights. We've got to go after the people that sold them their shelves, their flooring. We've got to go after everybody who provided anything to those businesses. So I think it's highly unlikely. From a real estate investment perspective, I think you're relatively safe, even though it's still currently illegal under federal law.
So I guess my question is to everybody in this room, including you, Justin. I mean, what for the people in this room and investors, what are the opportunities? I mean, what's the low-hanging fruit here when it comes to marijuana and the law?
I don't know that there's a low-hanging fruit. I mean, it's certainly a booming industry. If you can get involved at the ground floor, I think you're going to make a lot of money. You can look at those commercial properties that are available for sale, and that's probably the best way to try and get into it from a real estate investing perspective. Unless, again, you want to, if you have single-family homes, as we talked about, maybe you could have a pro-marijuana batch of homes, and you could offer a premium to people who want to smoke marijuana or grow marijuana on their property. If you own a commercial property that's in the green zone, you could look at leasing that out to a marijuana business, probably for a lot more than you would lease it out to somebody else. And to be honest, they're going to make a lot of money and they're going to pay the bill. So I think your exposure is low. Criminally and things like that, civil asset forfeiture, it's low. It's there. It exists. You should be aware of it. But I think your exposure, for the most part, is low. But if you're going to just go and purchase a commercial property in order to try and lease it to a marijuana business, you're going to pay a premium for those. Even already, you're going to pay a big premium for those.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you said that you mentioned the wholesaler that had called the gas station operator. I mean, obviously, there's wholesalers out there who are jumped right into this and found out where these locations are to see if they could get them under contract. So that's one way that people are doing it. Any other stories that you have from clients or anecdotal stories about this?
Not other than the one I just told, just to kind of give an idea of how much money I guess could be made out there. And we talked about the wholesaling. That is possible. Wholesaling is possible. But you're going to have to be on it, and because everybody else is. The wholesaler we talked about in the tire shop example, those people are out there. And so you could take Grand Rapids, for example. They passed the ordinance and they have a date, for when they're going to start issuing licenses. You've got to keep an eye on that website probably every single day. And the second they approve it and the map comes up and they show where the approved properties are, I mean, you've got to be calling those property owners, going to real property records, find out who owns that property, make them an offer, make them a deal. Because if you let days or weeks go by, the wholesalers, like we talked about, those big companies, they're going to have those things under contract already. Yeah.
My guess is the map's already out. I already received 2 postcards for where I lease, where they're looking, they're going to the city to get approval for it. So
in the city of Grand Rapids?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. So then we missed Grand Rapids.
I'm curious if anyone in our audience, and I know you seem to have some sort of marijuana business in mind or THC business in mind. Anybody else here have a perspective on this new law and how it affects you or any profit opportunities that you're seeing?
I have a commercial building that I hold the mortgage on. It used to be an appliance store. 2 years ago, he started growing marijuana. He was one of those that applied in Lansing for a license and was turned down. He's on the verge of losing the building. If anybody's got commercial out there with someone that is on the verge of losing their mortgage, check that green space list, because you may have an opportunity you don't know about.
So is the property you hold the mortgage on, is that a what do you call it, a space that's okay for marijuana?
It is.
So you're sitting on a gold mine then.
He was turned down, and he went to Colorado and found a large company and has reapplied for the second. They're doing a second group of properties in Lansing, a second group of licenses that they're approving. So because he was turned down, he went out and found someone that he thinks might be approved, but this is going to be his last chance.
Was he already growing in that location?
He was.
So would that be illegal then?
He was growing up to the 12 plants because he had a grow card for, and I don't know the whole industry.
He was doing that at home, or he was doing that on the commercial property?
On the commercial property.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm not sure how legal he was, but the mortgage I hold for him is very, very small. So if he defaults, I won't cry.
Anybody else?
I did take a class with Sun Title, and they went over a few actual marijuana. And in Colorado, there seems to be big piles of money, and these people wanting to come to Michigan to buy properties with cash. And what they're finding is because it's not federally taking care of this cash, they're having problems with title insurance on the property. That's just what I heard.
Yeah, title insurance is a big issue. I actually received a letter from an attorney that represents Liberty Title Insurance telling me that they had just reached a deal with an insurance company and that they would be insuring these deals. They are, at this point, the only title insurance company that I am aware of that will insure these deals. So especially, for the realtors, that have spoken already, if you're looking for a title company to insure those deals, Liberty Title is the one that I have been contacted by and told, given permission to tell people that they will insure marijuana properties.
This is just a kind of a miscellaneous note. When Colorado legalized marijuana, we were living in Las Vegas, and my job had us take some sort of seminar about the after effects of legalizing marijuana. And they said that, all these people thought, oh, it's so great, I can smoke marijuana, I can grow marijuana, it's legal there. However, it's still not federally legal, and that employers are still looking for applicants to pass a drug screen. So because all these people flock to Colorado, no one can pass a drug test, it actually put a huge strain on community resources like food pantries, like SNAP benefits, things of that nature. So I don't know. I don't hear that in discussion about legalizing marijuana right now. I know we're all in the limbo, but I just thought it was good to note, something to think about, one of the after effects of legalizing and how we're in that gray zone right now.
Sure. Yeah, and it's probably outside of the scope of this discussion, but there are, employers can still screen for marijuana. And if you test positive for marijuana, they can still have an anti-drug policy and they can still fire you. You don't have a legal right to smoke marijuana and work at that job. The people who work there don't have to give you that job. So I think a lot of people think, yeah, I can smoke marijuana now and then I can go to my job. And that's not the case.
But the employers don't want to know.
Well, some don't. Some do. Well, I think, especially if you're like, in a blue collar industry where you might have a lot of employees that would engage in that. You have to be very careful. What do they do? Is it high tech machinery where it could be dangerous, if they're under the influence? But ultimately, I've talked to some people who work in those industries and they said, what are we going to do? Start testing everybody for marijuana and lose half our workforce? So, yeah, there are lots of issues other than, just the real estate buying and selling and how do we get those insured and how do we bank? There's a lot of issues it raises.
So a lot of moving pieces, a lot of issues, but a lot of opportunity too for those who can figure out how to make money off of this. I think the last question before we wrap it up that I have for you, Justin, is just where do you see this heading in the next year, 5 years, 10 years? How is this law going to be figured out and settled in Michigan?
Well, I think within the next 10 years, completely my opinion, I think marijuana will be descheduled. Whether or not it's totally removed as a scheduled narcotic at all, I think it will be. I think it'll be legalized at a federal level. I think it'll be a little easier, a little clearer. We can't operate. People cannot be expected to operate the way that this is currently structured. States approve these, and we have these businesses and these industries that are getting started now, and now someone needs to go to a bank, and we can't. We have to have armored cars. It's like we're sort of opening, we're working in the black market, but yet in the open. So, you've got armored cars with $100,000 still moving cash and tons of marijuana. It still seems a little odd that we're going to legalize this and we still have to go through these back doors, these back channels. So I think ultimately Congress, I know it's a big ask, but I think they're going to agree on something, and I think eventually they'll agree to deschedule it. And when they do, I think a lot more people will jump into the industry. They'll feel more comfortable because there is risk. Is the risk small? I think yes. Could the federal government come in? If you authorize somebody to smoke marijuana, on your rental property, your one unit, are you technically perpetrating in a criminal activity by allowing them to grow, knowingly providing housing and technically, yes, I think you are. Does that mean anything is going to happen to you? No, I don't think so. And hopefully, our Congress will eventually realize that we need to put people at ease. I think it'll be descheduled, and then it'll be a little more like a typical regulated business, like cigarettes, like alcohol. I think along those lines, and that's the ultimate goal, I think.
Great. Well, I want to thank all of you for your excellent questions and for really bringing it this morning. And Justin, thank you for sharing all this information with us. You've been a real font of knowledge on this subject, so thank you very much.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you, and thank you, everyone.
I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's HIG investor.com. And you can also ask questions and join us on Facebook by going to RPOA, Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast. This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.